Privyet. Hello everyone. You're on the Slavic News Channel, and in this video, we'll discuss the most significant updates on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We have a lot of interesting updates, so let's begin. And first, let's talk about New York. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the central part and in the eastern part of New York. The Russians captured additional positions along Kvitkova Street. The Russians captured additional positions along Armyskaya Street, and the Russians improved their positions along Slavianskaya Street and Beregova Street. So the Russians captured significant territories as reported by Neutral Mapper. Now let's move further. During the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians counterattacked the Russians in the central part of New York to the north of the river that split New York in two. In this video, we can see a significant number of Ukrainian stormtroopers of 425th Separate Storm Battalion Skala. The Ukrainians landed in this area and began clearing the territory. As a result of clashes, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over this part of the city and to capture a significant number of Russian soldiers, who surrendered due to encirclement because the Rita water barrier did not allow the Russians to withdraw their positions. Now let's talk about Zaluzhnoye. Also, according to information we have, the Russians managed to secure the territory along Pionarov Avenue in the southern direction, and from this perspective, Zaluzhnoye most likely was already captured by the Russians, and maybe today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information. If we calculate the distance between the edge Russian positions in Zaluzhnoye and the edge Russian positions in New York, the distance between these 2 points is less than 3.5 kilometers. More precisely, the distance is 3 kilometers and 250 meters, which means that the Ukrainians who are currently located in the fields, in this network of fortifications, strongholds, and shelters, are already encircled by the Russians, and this is the real cauldron. The Ukrainians will not be able to evacuate and to withdraw their positions towards Teresko without losses, because the area that remains under Ukrainian control is just the fields, tree lines, water barriers, so no fortifications, no buildings, no constructions that they can use to hide from Russian FPV drone strikes and Russian artillery strikes. We don't know the exact number of Ukrainians who are there, but most likely it's between 1 to 1.5 battalions. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Pokrovsk direction. We have significant progress on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians introduced the forces of 27th Division. It's a very big army with significant number of forces, and the Russians are saying that now the progress is going to be sped up by the Russians. Now let's talk about the changes on the ground, and let's talk about the northern direction of this city. During the previous night, the Russians, according to information we have, improved their positions to the west of Timofeevka and reached the outskirts of the next stronghold that located between Timofeevka and Lysychina. This information was provided by pro-Ukrainian mappers. Now let's move further. According to information we have from different sources, either from the Russians and from Ukrainian sources, the Russians entered the village of Ivanovka, the Russians established complete control over the southeastern part of this settlement, and they continue moving further in the northwestern direction. This information was also provided by pro-Ukrainian mappers and by pro-Russian sources. Now let's talk about Vesely. According to information we have, the Russians established complete control over this village. This information was confirmed by different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian and neutral mappers. So the situation in this direction is very critical. The Russians established complete control over the road 05-44 between Sergeyevka and Grodovka itself, which led to a significant reduce of Ukrainian logistic possibilities. Very interesting details are coming from Zalana. According to information we have, the Russians improved their positions further in the southwestern direction along the railways, and basically, Zalana was cut from the main line from Novogradovka, Grodovka, and Seladovo. Now the Russians established control over the railway station, and now the Russians are able to begin assault of Zalana from many directions, including from the northern part, from the area of the railway station, from the area of the cemetery, and obviously, the Ukrainians will not be able to hold this territory for a very long time. Furthermore, According to updates we received, the Russians improved their positions in the fields as well, getting closer and closer to the road 05-42 between Novosolovka Persha and Zalana itself. Now let's move further, and let's talk about Konstantinovka. During the previous night, we got one of the most important updates since the beginning, probably of the 2024. The Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to cut the 05-24 road physically and to raise the flag in this area. So the clashes for this territory have been taking place for a very long time. We got a few videos from this direction. We have some updates. First, we have the updates of different mappers, and later we got details that were published by pro-Russian sources. In this video, we can see the Russian drone that was flying above this road, the main supply road between Ugledar and Konstantinovka. In this part of the video, we can see an abandoned Russian vehicle along the road, and there was a flag raised above this vehicle. Let's take a look once again. So this is the vehicle, and this is the Russian flag that was raised probably by reconnaissance and sabotage groups of Russian army. So this is most likely the beginning of the last chapter of Konstantinovka-Ugledar battle. And today, we got also very interesting video from the most southern part of the stronghold. In this video, we can see the process of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions. And as a result of another strike, the Russians managed to destroy a very powerful, very big ammo depot in the southern part of Konstantinovka. So based on this geolocation, based on the previous attempts of Russian forces to storm the village, and the Russian attempts to attack the same village in direction along the line Pobeda-Konstantinovka, we can say that Konstantinovka is already semi-encircled, and most likely within the next 72 hours, the Russians will make additional attempts with the purpose to enter Konstantinovka itself, to create a cauldron to encircle Ukrainians, or to force them to fall back. As for other directions, we haven't received a lot of very interesting things, just regular activity of Russian army along Seversky-Donetsk-Donbass Canal. After the Russians captured and secured Glashevka, now the Russians are focused on Ukrainian positions along canal, trying to force them to fall back. Most likely, the Russians will resume their attempts to move further and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this direction. As for Seversky, we haven't received anything special, just regular Russian artillery activity. The Russians were bombing Verny-Kamyansk very heavily, and the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions of FPV drone operators. So the city is being prepared by the Russians before further attempts to attack. Kupiansk direction we haven't received anything, and just regular artillery activity, and the same story about the regular activity in Kharkiv area. The only difference about Kharkiv area is that the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the Kharkiv offensive operation, I'm talking about the official report of Forces North, stated that today the Russians were in the defense stage. So usually the Russians were saying that they are continuing their offensive operation in Kharkiv area with the purpose to create a buffer zone. And today, for the first time, the Russians stated that they are in defense operation, which confirms that most likely the Russians in the very near future are not planning to restore any activity. They will try only to repel the Ukrainian attacks. And according to the Russians, the Ukrainians concentrate a significant army. And we have very interesting details coming from Kyiv. The Ukrainian authorities started talking about peace and their willingness to meet with Russia and Putin. So it seems the Ukrainians are ready to start negotiation process. But for now, only caveat is that they are ready to start negotiation only on their terms. And that's it for this update. Slavic News Channel condemn any violence in the world. Thanks for watching, and please like and subscribe.